Good afternoon. I'm Jan McDavid of Hogan Lovells, and I have the opportunity today to spend some time with my dear friend, Debbie Majoras, now the General Counsel of Procter & Gamble, but with a long, distinguished career in antitrust prior to her current position. Debbie, thanks for being here today.
Jan, great to see you, as always.
It's really a pleasure. So tell me how you decided to become a lawyer. Let's go back to the beginning.
Well, I definitely wasn't one of those folks who always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. You know, John Majoras, my husband, knew that from a very young age. I had always wanted to be either a teacher, or once I got into college, I thought I wanted to be a social worker, really in very much a service profession. And then when I was a senior in college, a professor pulled me aside and said, you know, you really ought to think about ways that you can affect change from the top and not, you know, it's great. We need lots of people who can help other people one-to-one, but you really ought to start thinking about something a little bit differently. And it was the first time anyone had ever talked to me that way. I didn't, I have one uncle who's a lawyer, but, you know, I didn't really have a lot of exposure to lawyers. So when I graduated from college, I moved to Washington, where I met lots of lawyers.
And that didn't dissuade you?
It didn't dissuade me. In fact, my first job out of college, I was a receptionist at a law firm, for the Porter Wright law firm. And, you know, I needed a job. I needed some money to pay the rent. And I figured I would, if I'm the receptionist, I'll get to talk to a lot of lawyers and, you know, perhaps I can figure this out. So I ended up applying to law school that year, eventually became a paralegal at the firm, and then applied to law school. So it all happened pretty quickly.
And that took you to Charlottesville.
And that took me to UVA. That's right. Mm-hmm.
And then following your law school career, you clerked for a federal judge in Washington.
Mm-hmm. I did.
Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, I did a 2-year clerkship, and it was interesting because I was so afraid to do a 2-year clerkship. It seemed like such a long time. But Judge Harris, who you know, yes, because he used to be a partner at Hogan, convinced me that this would be one of the best experiences of my career and that 2 years would not seem like a long time, and he was absolutely right. And, you know, being in D.C. in the trial court is a great place to be because there's just so many interesting cases that cross the desk. And in fact, there was a big merger case that the FTC brought while I was clerking for Judge Harris. And that's actually where I really became very interested in doing antitrust. It was the R.R. Donnelly case.
No kidding.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the FTC lost that case.
Mm-hmm. And the FTC lost that case. I have to say, I wrote that opinion for Judge Harris, the draft, and
yes.
So, you know, never knowing that someday I would end up at the FTC. But that case really sparked my interest because on the one hand, it seemed completely massive to me and like I would never get my arms wrapped around it, because I remember when the parties started filing all of their exhibits and so forth for the PI hearing, I lined them all up in the jury room, and it was just this sea of black notebooks, right, and just me to try to read all of this. So on the one hand, it seemed just daunting, but once I got into it and really started thinking about these marketplace issues, I loved it. I thought it was just really great stuff.
Well, and that's kind of what I've always enjoyed about antitrust, is that it's so fact-intensive that it's kind of like reading a mystery or peeling an onion. Mm-hmm. You keep getting deeper and deeper into the facts. Yeah,
and what you learn is that every antitrust case, when you analyze, you know, the marketplace behavior and the competition, is a world you didn't know about, and you sort of get into that world. So that really sparked my interest in antitrust.
So where did you go after your clerkship with Judge Harris?
From there, I moved to Chicago, and I started working as an associate for Jones Day. And there weren't any antitrust partners per se, full-time antitrust partners in the Chicago office. So I went in as a litigator, and I started to work with Joe McEntee, who you may know.
Joe and I worked together in the antitrust section when I was an associate.
And Joe was heading up litigation in Chicago, but he also, of course, had an interesting experience in antitrust. So I told him that I had this interest and that as antitrust projects came up, I'd really love to work on them. And he said, well, that's great, because I'd like to have a go-to associate as opposed to reinventing the wheel with someone every time. And so I started doing work for Joe. And then a day that he will never let me forget, I asked him if I could go to the spring meeting in, I think it was '92. And he said, yeah, that's a great idea for you to learn more about antitrust and so forth. So when I was there, he introduced me to Joe Sims. And that was at a time where more and more antitrust associates were needed, yes. But because
enforcement was ramping
up, but because it hadn't been very hot for a while, there weren't a lot of associates who had chosen that path.
Right.
And so Joe and others in the Washington office needed some help. And so Joe asked Joe McEntee, well, who is this person? And, might we be able to get some help from her? And McEntee always tells me now it was the worst thing he ever did.
Because he never saw you again.
From that point on, he didn't see me again. Joe Sims took over my life, and it really is true that Joe Sims and I hit it off very, very well, and really, always enjoyed working with him. And he's definitely one of the 2 or 3 people who have had the strongest influence on my career, without a doubt.
So, did you continue to staff Joe from Chicago?
I did for a while, and then I moved to Cleveland. And certainly in Cleveland, Jones Day had antitrust partners, so it was a lot easier for an associate to move into that group. So I moved from litigation into the antitrust group, and worked with the Cleveland partners too. Bob Brosson was there, Tom Demetrak, Steve Squarey, and but I still went back and forth to Washington quite a bit. And it was funny because what Joe kept telling me was, you really need to just focus on mergers. And in fact, you really need to move to Washington. And what the partners in Cleveland kept telling me is, you can't do mergers and litigation, and you need to be doing litigation. And so I just, nodded at both of them and kept doing mergers and litigation, both, because I didn't want to choose one or the other. I really liked the balance of those, and I felt like it was a much richer antitrust, portfolio.
Balance probably isn't the right word to describe what was effectively 2 full-time jobs.
Well, there's that. It was, but it was great. It was, on the litigation side, I was able to work on the brand name pharmaceuticals litigation, which, there were 50 law firms working on, and so I learned a lot about, the big antitrust class action. But then worked on some really fun mergers with Joe over time. We did a lot for TCI, and we did the first big radio merger after the Telecom Act had been amended, which was CBS doing a big acquisition. So it was fun. It was a great portfolio.
At some point, however, Joe did get you to move to Washington.
He did. It was funny because it got to the point where some of our other colleagues didn't really want to have dinner with Joe and me because all we would do was talk about, Joe would bring up the subject of why I should move to D.C. and it became something of a joke among a small group of us. So finally he did. I loved working with him and really wanted to do more of it. But I was very wary of Washington, D.C. I don't like politics very much. And I sometimes felt that the whole atmosphere in Washington, where I had lived, obviously before law school, and then during my clerkship, I just felt like Washington wasn't always the healthiest atmosphere. And I just was a little bit worried about that. And, I'm very comfortable in the Midwest. So I didn't think I wanted to move to Washington. But after about 6 years of this discussion, he really said to me, I'm going to try this one more time. And he talked to me about the future and what it could look like and so forth. And he was very persuasive. And so John and I sat down and talked about it and decided that it would be a great move. John was more excited about moving to Washington than I was, and so I moved, set about in early 2001 to make a move to Washington.
But then you got a little speed bump and decided to change jobs. So tell us about that.
Yes, it was really funny actually because I was in Washington in I don't know, maybe January probably, possibly February, early February. And Phil Proger said, I want to show you your new office, and we're so excited you're coming. And I said, well, I'm very excited too. So Phil took me to show me the office. It was a very nice office, and I was very excited. So then as we walked back down the hall, I ran into Charles James, our other partner, who said, hey, you have a few minutes this afternoon? Stop by. And I said, sure, I've got a few minutes. And it never occurred to me, Charles it had been in the newspaper that Charles was likely to be tapped to be the next Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, but I hadn't really talked to him about it, so I didn't think anything of this. And I stopped by his office, and he said, you may have heard the president intends to appoint me. And I said, well, I heard the rumor, congratulations. And he said, well, I want you to come with me, and I want you to be a Deputy Assistant Attorney General. And I almost fell off my chair. And the first thing that went through my head was, oh my God, how are we going to pay for this house that we just bought?
Yes,
the things you think of
salary.
on a government salary. But, it takes about a couple of minutes to process,
right.
And then the realization is, wow, what an exciting opportunity. It had always been in the back of my head that if I moved to D.C., maybe someday I might have such an opportunity, but this was completely
You thought
out
it
of the
might be
blue.
more than 30 minutes.
Yeah, I thought so. So I shifted gears in a hurry, and I went to DOJ.
Well, what I remember was that you parachuted into the Antitrust Division before Charles got confirmed.
Yes.
I don't recall why, but Charles' confirmation was slower than expected,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he wanted an emissary in the building
mm-hmm.
to understand what was happening. John Nannis was acting,
mm-hmm.
and Charles wanted someone on the ground,
mm-hmm.
which is actually exactly what Christine Varney did with
mm-hmm.
Sheriff Posen
Yep.
in the current administration.
Exactly, and in fact, the White House wanted it as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. They wanted to start getting their people in, and so yes, I went in a couple of months actually before Charles did, and worked with John Nannis, which, by the way, was short but a fantastic experience.
John's a wonderful guy.
He's just a super guy and was a super gentleman about the whole thing, and we had a good time in a short time.
When did you start then at the division?
I think it was April 16th, 2001.
So right after you paid your taxes.
It was the day after Easter that year, right after we paid the taxes, and only about, I think, 6 weeks from the time I had my White House interview.
Well, I also recall that you got there at a time of what turned out to be a way more exciting period than anyone expected a brand new deputy
mm-hmm.
to have to step into. So
mm-hmm.
tell me about what was waiting for you when you got to the Antitrust Division.
Well, GE had announced its intention to buy Honeywell, and there were already rumblings. This was obviously a very large international deal to be reviewed by the Justice Department as well as the European Commission, and there were already some rumblings about whether they were going to agree on this. And when I got there, John was recused on the deal. So I, the first day, became the most senior official on the GE Honeywell deal. And fortunately, we had Connie Robinson, Bob Kramer, and others who were, unbelievably experienced hands at merger review at the division. And so they had this well in hand. They in fact had already decided that yes, the merger could go through with some divestitures. But they were starting discussions with the European Commission, and that did not look like it was going to go well. And so, I was asked to go to Brussels and talk to Mario Monti and Alex Schaub about this deal and why we didn't think that it was a problem even for Europe. And it was really actually quite funny because I said, sure, of course, I'll go. And so I got a phone number for Mario, and I called his office. And I got put on hold for a very long time. And then finally, an assistant came back and said, we're going to have to call you back. And they did eventually, but what I didn't know, and I know now, because since then Mario and I have become very good friends, and we laugh about this, they were calling Doug Melamed
Find out who you were.
to find out who I was.
Yeah, I have no doubt.
Who is she? Is she legitimate? Do we need to meet with her?
We actually need to talk to this person.
And Doug said, yes, she replaced me. So yes. So I did. I flew over to Brussels, and I remember I had my talking points all very, very carefully written out, and then I wrote them out again in my hotel room in Brussels. I was so nervous, I didn't sleep a wink the night before, and I'd been told that it would just be Alex and Mario and no one else. So I was only going to so I only brought with me a young woman from the mission, the U.S. mission,
right.
The State Department. And so in we
Not
went.
an antitrust lawyer.
No, no. So I was on my own. In we went, and I met Alex and Mario. But then my now good friend Gert Strauss had also said, no. Apparently, I'm going to meet too. So they were all there with me on the other side of the table, and it was a fascinating thing. Mario is a very thoughtful person. And there's a nice thing about him is that he actually listens more than he talks, which isn't always common, right, in our field. But I honestly think we met for about 2 hours, and I did almost all of the talking. I just gave them the whole chapter and verse. And at the end of it, Mario looked at me, and in that very calm and polite and very gentlemanly
way.
Yes, he said, "My goodness, you really learned the facts of this in a short period of time." So, well, thank you. But they didn't reveal anything to me. They didn't tell me a thing.
They didn't tell you what thinking.
They wouldn't tell me at all.
So Gertz didn't tell you he was preparing to drive the train off a cliff?
Gertz did not. I could tell he wasn't very happy to have me there.
Right.
But really, I talked and they listened, and there wasn't a lot of back and forth at that time. And from that point on, I got my introduction to what it's like to be part of an administration, because you had a new administration, everybody kind of loaded for bear, right? This issue gets to the attention of folks, at the State Department, in the White House, and so forth, and I had some of those folks calling me saying, this, you kind of wanted to bring up the nationalism issue, like this
right.
was anti-U.S. And here I am, brand new in this job, and I don't know much at all. But what I did know is that did not feel right to me. That was not the way to do this. I really kept saying, no, this is an antitrust case. We need to talk about this as an antitrust case. This is not trade relations or any of that. But I do remember that the president was going over very shortly thereafter to Europe for the G7 or G8 or whatever it was at the time, and I had to write talking points for him in a very, half a page. And I do remember thinking that was pretty cool.
Well, and I recall that at one point the president actually made a statement on the case,
I believe
which
that's
is
right.
a pretty remarkable thing
Mm-hmm.
to have happened in my experience in antitrust. I don't remember another occasion on which the president has addressed an issue like this.
I think that's right, Jan, and as I look back on it, I wonder whether if that had happened 2 or 3 years into the administration, whether he would have done it. I think when an administration is new, everything seems very big, I think, and so who would know? But I do remember that very well, and at times thinking, I get off the phone with the State Department or someone at the White House thinking, I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just trying my best here.
And Charles wasn't there yet.
And Charles was not there yet. And I was being very careful because Charles was still, talking to people on the Hill and so forth. And so I was being very careful with him not to put him in an awkward position. So it was, and of course I couldn't get John Nannis guidance because he was recused.
Right.
So it was a great learning experience.
Well, I remember thinking when I saw the president's statement that this was going to end it in Europe because, in fact, the Europeans would never approve it after the president had spoken on the issue because they couldn't be seen to be bending to the will of the United States government.
Yeah.
And that whoever it was who had procured that statement had actually submarined the deal.
And I think it's a really good point. Looking back, I think there were a number of things that probably did submarine it, and the GE people would know this better than I, but I started suspecting that maybe they were, in the end they were fine. They were fine walking away. But it was a tough, it really was, you could see some of that drama between Jack Welch and Mario Monti. You could see it playing out. And at the end of it, in fact, Jack Welch called me and said, just want to, thank you for your efforts and your professionalism, and then, made a few other remarks as well in his very Jack Welch-like way.
Well, about a year later, I had dinner with Commissioner Monti, and he sung your praises to the heavens. And he talked about what an extraordinary thing it was for someone of your age and experience and new to the job to have stepped in and taken the role that you had taken, and how much he admired you for it.
Yeah, well, that's really terrific. He is a gentleman and a dear, dear person, and it was one of the great things about my life in antitrust has been just the superb human beings that I've been lucky enough to meet, and he's in that category. He's a terrific person and a great scholar, and he was a good commissioner.
Well, and then G. Honeywell died, and you jumped from the frying pan into the fire of Microsoft.
I did indeed.
So the division had won the Microsoft case.
Mm-hmm.
September 11th had happened,
mm-hmm.
and it was the fall, and settlement discussions began. So why don't you take us there?
Yeah, and in fact, while the division, important to remember is that while the division had won at the district court and parts of the case had been upheld at the Court of Appeals, the Court of Appeals at the end of June of 2001, 1 week after Charles started, so now he was there, handed down an opinion in which they upheld very large parts of the case, but actually threw out some large parts of it too. In fact, they're in their own words. They said, we've drastically altered the findings on liability. So right away, we took a look at this, and Charles said from day one, we are not going to be accused of not taking this case seriously. In fact, he said to Hugh and me and Bill Klasky and the others from the beginning, whatever cases Joel Klein and his team brought, we will take them forward. In other words, that's the way this is supposed to work. You don't just come in. So our instructions on Microsoft were to be very, very, to be very tough and to, and in fact, right away, what Charles said was, well, with David Boyes gone, we need to go out and hire someone, from the outside of that caliber, so that everyone will know that we're very serious about this case. So we had hired Phil Beck, who coincidentally had been on the other side of Bush v. Gore from David Boyes. We didn't hire him for that reason, but we ended up hiring. So in any event, we had told the judge that we didn't think settlement was possible, and that we were not interested in going down that road, and let's set a remedies trial and let's go. But the judge had other ideas. So in fact, Microsoft was pushing settlement, and we were scheduled to meet with them on September 11th, as it turns out. And of course, that meeting never occurred. So we told the judge, no, we don't think settlement is possible. And so we went into court at the end of September. I remember this very, very well because we were completely squished on these benches in the district court. And I remember I was next to M.J. Moulton-Bray. And the judge said, I'm going to read to you from the order I've written in this case. And she starts out, and obviously I'm paraphrasing some, but she says, on September 11th, 2001, our nation's priorities changed. And then basically the paragraph is, I want you to sell this case. And she said, and this part, she definitely said, I want you negotiating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to get this case settled, and I'll give you 5 weeks. To do it, I'll give you the first 2, and then if you don't settle it, I'm going to give you a mediator. So I almost audibly gasped at that, and most people wouldn't have known why. But MJ knew why, and she grabbed my hand and squeezed it.
Because you were getting married.
Because I was supposed to get married 6 days later. So I was a little bit nervous about this timetable. But we started the next day. I mean, we had to. We had to start from scratch talking to Microsoft on this thing. And, they thought in the beginning, I think, that they were going to get, from us just a thou shalt not do this following laundry list of things, right. And that wasn't right. So it was excruciating. I mean, every sentence, every word of that thing was just unbelievable. And of course, the states were there too, so they were negotiating with us, and so I actually went to get married, and
and on a honeymoon.
I did go on a honeymoon. In fact, when I first walked into the reception, Charles was right there, and he cornered me and took me over and started talking to me about an issue. And Phil Procter came and broke us up and said, "Stop it! It's her wedding day. You can't do this." Right. And I went on my honeymoon, and in fact, it didn't matter too much because very little got accomplished in that first couple weeks. In fact, as the judge had predicted. And while I was gone, they spent probably 4 or 5 days of it just trying to figure out a mediator. So I got back from my honeymoon in Hawaii on a Saturday, and Sunday morning I was back negotiating together with the team in Microsoft. And you know, as you know, we reached a settlement. It was a settlement for which you know, we got reamed in the media, reamed by Microsoft's competitors that we had sold out, and that this wasn't strong enough. And you know, look, I understand how hard it was for people to go from the idea that Microsoft was going to be broken up to, you know, behavioral remedies. I understand all of that. But of course, I didn't think then, and I don't think today, that there was a chance in the world that the D.C. Circuit was going to uphold such a remedy, and they pretty much had told us so. So you know, that was a very tough time because I'm not a politician. I said that. Right. You know, I'm an antitrust lawyer.
Don't even like it.
And don't even like politics. So getting reamed like that was tough. I learned a lot that would help me later, believe me, about it. But the one thing that bothered me the most, Jan, and that I still just hate to this day, was the idea that this was a political hack job. That all we had done was we'd come in with the intention of, you know, just tanking the whole thing, and it was, you know, people would talk about it, and then I'd ask them a question. And in their answer, it showed they'd never even read the consent decree. You know, they'd never even read the darn thing. So, but I learned a lot about how, you know, how you do things. You have to make judgments. You have to do things that you think are right, and you can't live your life in Washington by, you know, looking to see which way the wind is blowing. You know, ultimately, the district court upheld our settlement and wrote a very nice piece about, hey, you don't really know. This is actually really quite good if you look at it. And then I had the opportunity to argue in favor of the settlement in the D.C. Circuit en banc, which was, you know, an in-court experience, probably the greatest, most exciting in my career, because Judge Bork was on the other side. So that was, for an antitrust lawyer, that's fun and exciting. Yeah. And the D.C. Circuit upheld us 6-0.
Well, and I remember seeing the drawings that the court reporter had done for that. And I think somebody gave you, at your going away party from the Antitrust Division, a mock drawing that showed you in a funny hat arguing that case, and in very high heels, of course, which is of course how you always addressed.
Looking like Carmen Miranda.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
It was a basket of fruit on your head.
Because all during the discussions about how to argue this case and so forth, we talked about the Supreme Court cases that talk about denying the fruits of the violation.
Oh, that's what it was.
And so we would, you know, you're in the middle of the night, you're giddy, and you start telling jokes about fruit this and fruit that, and so this is why I have
Renata? Renata gave you that. I remember that now.
That's right.
Well, I remember the first time you and I did a program together, and you explained that you were still in high school when the Hart-Scott Act was passed. So that put the rest of us in our places.
Well, the great thing about that was a NERA conference in Santa Fe, where Charles was supposed to speak, but I went in his stead and spoke alongside Tim Uris. Yep. And so I was thinking, oh, good heavens, this is great. You know, these people, a lot of them don't even know me, but what I remember, Jan, that was very gratifying and really was a great start to our friendship was that you took it upon yourself to really make sure I was okay that day and at that conference, really, because I think you knew that I was trying to make a good impression on everybody, but this wasn't quite yet my crowd.
I think that was your first summer.
It was.
It was right after Charles was confirmed. Exactly. It was the summer of 2001.
Yes, it was.
And yeah.
But I remember that very well, and I was always very grateful to you for the way you welcomed me into that crowd.
Well, it was a start of a great friendship.
Indeed.
What I recall about your going away party at the Antitrust Division was the way not just the lawyers and front office people, but the staff behaved, because it was clear to me that you knew everyone in the building. and that the security guards attended your going away party, and you knew them by name. And it was a really good life lesson to the young lawyers in the room. Just last week I did a program about the history of women in my law firm, and one of the points that some of the pioneers ahead of me said was they realized that the staff really mattered, and the staff can make you or break you. And that was clear from that party.
Yeah, it's that really comes from my parents, who just love people and are respectful of all people, no matter what they do, and I love people too. But you know, it's hard when you first go into the government agencies because the staff, they don't know what to make of you, right? And I went in and I'm excited, and I'm thinking, I get along with people, this will be great, and you get the feeling, and this isn't true with all due respect, but you get the feeling they're just looking at you like, yeah, now, and what you realize is another one, and you realize that every 3 to 4 years they get this another team of so-called hotshots that they're supposed to listen to, and I did see a few people coming in the administration at that time who I thought were very disrespectful to the staff, and I could see right away that wasn't, even if you were only strategic about it and didn't care about people, that isn't going to work. So I just decided that I would roll up my sleeves, and you can't just say to this group of people, hey, trust me, I promise you. You just roll up your sleeves, you get in the trenches with people, you start working with them and let them see that you want the things that they want. And it worked out well. And I think too, with the DOJ staff, I think that when Hugh got the AAG job that I had wanted and I didn't, and I stayed, that they felt then how much I really did love public service and cared about our mission.
And the institution.
And the institution. Because that's not an easy thing to have happen.
Right.
And it wasn't. And I've been very open about that, that my ego was very bruised at the time. But what you also realize is, for crying out loud, these are great jobs with a great opportunity to make an impact. And, and quite frankly, that year that I spent when Hugh was AAG and I was the principal deputy was one of the greatest years of my career. We had so much fun, and it was just a great time. So I'm glad I stayed.
Well, and a lot of the staff, I think, were of a different political persuasion than you were, but they came to appreciate the role that you played.
Well, I think they do. I mean, I think the great thing about so many of the people in public service is that they understand how the system works, and they have respect for that system. And what they ask for is, respect in return, and you show that by things like listening to everyone and making decisions. People can take the decision, whatever it is you make, even if it's not what they want you to do. Just make it.
Right.
Don't go on and on forever. And I remember one of the economists, George Wazansky, saying that to me. No, it wasn't George. I'm sorry. One of the economists, though, said to me, we appreciated that. It was Norm. Norm said that you would make a decision, one way or the other, and we moved on. And I realized at that time, wow, that actually does show respect for people, right, because you don't make them sit on it forever, wondering what they ought to be doing. So it was a great experience.
So then you went back to private practice, back to Jones Day.
Yes.
But I remember having lunch with you a very short time after you left the Antitrust Division, and you said you were going back into government.
Yeah, it was really amazing. I took a month off, and then I was in my first week at Jones Day. Boxes all around me, and I got a call from Tim Uris. Said, this is super, super confidential, went on for 5 minutes about how he'd kill me if I told
Secret
anyone.
grip and all that.
Yeah, all that, and said, I'm going to be leaving, and the White House wants to know if you're interested. And my first words were, but I just got back here. Right. And he said, I know. Can I have them call you? And I said, yeah, sure. And Tim and I kept that a secret for from early February until early May. And it was great. I don't know how we kept it, but we managed.
Well, and I spoke at the time to someone in the White House counsel's office, my friend and former partner David Leach,
Oh,
who's now the
sure.
general counsel of Ford. And they were having trouble getting a deal to get you guys confirmed. And so David called me and said, we're thinking about a recess appointment, and should we do both of them to reduce the political pressure? And I said yes. And I believe that both you and Jonathan were given a recess appointment on the same day.
Yeah, we were. And it was my nomination, of course, that had been held up over gasoline prices in '04. It was tough because I think even Jonathan didn't even know whether he should take it, right? I mean, would that offend Democrats if he took the recess appointment? But I do believe that he got some good advice from some Democrats on the Hill who said, just get there.
I think Senator Cole probably assured him it would be okay.
And just get there. And so so Jonathan and I started at the same time, and we had our hearing together, and so you bond with people pretty quickly when you have those experiences.
I understand. And there were political issues at the time. It was a time of very high gasoline prices, and I recall that Senator Wyden and Senator Boxer, in particular, were very critical.
They were from the start, they made it pretty clear to me, particularly Senator Wyden, that if I would agree to that once I got to the agency, I would sue the oil companies to bring down the price of gasoline. Never mind, there's not such a cause of action that I know of.
Whether or not there were merits.
Right, whether or not there were merits. All I needed to do was agree with that, and boom, my nomination could sail through. And I said, I'm sorry, Senator, I can't do it. I have no evidence in front of me that they've broken the law, and this is a law enforcement agency, and I'm just not going to do it. So, that was a tough time, and even being recess appointed was tough because should President Bush have lost in November, I could have stayed at the agency for another full year as a commissioner, but they wouldn't have left me in the chairmanship, so I would have been in a very interesting spot.
Absolutely. So you got confirmed, and what were your big experiences at the Federal Trade Commission, the things of which you are most proud?
Well, I actually, a lot of people like to talk about it in terms of cases, and I definitely have some of those I could talk about. But when I really look back on the things I'm most proud of, it's more the way we did things, which I think we worked very hard at. And I can start with actually gasoline prices, because as you remember, Jan, I mean that was just twice a year pretty much. I was hauled up to the Hill to answer for this, and of course, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita happened during that time, and there were allegations of price gouging going on, and we had done a study there. So there was a lot around that, and it was very easy for both parties on the Hill to attack us, to say you're not doing enough for consumers in this area, and I understood the frustration, but I just simply wasn't going to give in on measures that would not be good for consumers. I mean, our job was to protect consumers. And I do think that's the part where not being interested in politics helped me. Because while it's very hard to sit there and get yelled at and then have, your mother see you on C-SPAN with people, going after you, you feel much better if you know that they didn't scream you into submission. And, I didn't care enough about the politics to just give in on things that I thought would be bad for consumers. And, we talked about the staff at the DOJ, but I think that was good for the staff at the FTC too, because what they realized was this isn't a political game.
We're going to do the right thing.
We're going to do the right thing. This is what we do here is important, and we're not going to sell it for an easier hearing or an easier time or a few fewer letters. And the fascinating thing about that was, I never received a single letter from consumers angry at me about gasoline prices. On that issue, I only received some from consumers saying, some of them even saying, I don't necessarily agree with everything you said, but thank you for standing up and not just sitting, not just taking it. And so, so I learned a lot in that helps me even now about how important it is. You can't be rigid, but you do take stands sometimes in life, and you have to be willing to take the heat. And then I think just in the way we tried to review mergers and look at cases. When I went in, I said the day I got sworn in, not the ceremonial one, but the very first day. I said the way we're going to do things is we're going to apply the law to facts, and that's going to be our governing principle. And I will falter sometimes because other things come into your head and there's other things. And when I do, I want you to call me out on it. And a couple times they did.
Interesting.
There was a merger, the Whole Foods transaction, and which was late in my tenure. And I used to, before, as I was evaluating where we ought to bring action, I would always ask myself, what good will this do for society? What good will we really be doing for consumers in this? And on that one, I was having a harder time coming up with why it would be so good for the world.
Because yuppies could buy their kohlrabi at a lower price.
Exactly. If you want to pay $5 for a head of iceberg lettuce, it'd be but you can't look at it that way. And in fact, that's what the staff said to me. They said, look,
Well, they showed you the documents.
You tell us this is the way we're supposed to evaluate this. We're evaluating this under the guidelines. Look how this looks. And they were right about that. And that's why I voted. Because when you looked at the guidelines and you looked at the law, that was the case. And then that's why I voted to bring it.
Well, so there were those spectacular documents.
Yeah, those documents were fairly persuasive, I must say. So I think we spent a lot of time. Thinking about how we thought things through, and probably one of the most painful things that I remember in that was when, in the only case we brought at the FTC during my tenure, where I was in the minority,
right,
and where I was in a dissenting position, and that was the N-Data case.
And that was a consent decree.
It was, and I wouldn't have done it, and I said so. But it was tough, Tom Rush and I got along very well, but that was the one where we really butted heads. And, we had some good discussions and we had some heated discussions. And, there were people who worked with me who were really worried that if I was in a dissenting position, it would look as though I had lost control, as chairman. And in the end, I just decided I couldn't worry about that. I had to decide this the way I thought best. And I didn't agree with bringing it, and you get past those things, and we did. So
well, but shortly after that, you left the agency and returned to the private sector, and moved to Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yes, yes, which people in Washington could not believe I was going to do.
But we talked about it, and you bought a home on a golf course, and I know how much you love to play golf.
Yep.
And we haven't done that lately.
I know. We need to get out there.
And so tell me about life in the private sector in the very few minutes we have left.
Okay. It's terrific. It's the job I have now, running the legal department and on the executive management team at P&G, is not terribly dissimilar in some ways from being at the FTC, in the sense that you're running an organization and then working sort of in administration. But it's fascinating. I spent all this time, 7 years, thinking about markets, appreciating markets, talking to people around the world about markets, and now I'm living it. Now I'm living it. P&G is all over the world. Very much now an international company, and it's fascinating and fun to learn about how to run a business, how markets work. And as you know, we're many different product markets, so there's lots of learning to be done. And
consumer products, lots and lots of consumer products.
Yeah, so it's still working for consumers. It's just in a different way, and I love it. It's
so what's your legal department like? How many lawyers do you have? And they're all over the world.
Yeah,
because I've met them in Europe.
Yes,
with you.
Yes. There's it's about at any given time about 350 lawyers.
That's a lot of lawyers.
About and then in the department wide with all of our other professionals, 560, something like that. So yeah, it's a good sized law firm.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's an extraordinarily devoted group. People who work for P&G tend to love it. It's a very passionate group of people, and the lawyers are no different. So I'm very lucky because I have experts all over the world, and they're very, very good.
And a good supply of detergent.
Yes, we have plenty of that.
Well, Debbie, thank you for spending the day with us today. This has really been a lot of fun.
It has been fun for me too. Thanks, Jan. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.